welcome everyone. I'm still trying to land back on Earth after that amazing back and forth with the great Dr. Hansen. But actually, it was a perfect segue into this panel, which is on the theme of open-ended intelligence. And I hinted at this theme a bit in my introductory remarks this morning when I talked about how, maximizing computable expected reward functions, or even maximizing goal functions of future histories, these ways of thinking about intelligence, which are very useful and practical to work with for certain purposes, really don't do justice to what human level intelligence, let alone transhuman intelligence, are. And saying that is one thing, but then fleshing out other broader ways of thinking about intelligence and mind is a different thing. And I think this is a philosophical matter, but it's also more than a philosophical matter, because as we engineer AGI systems, how we're thinking about what intelligence is and what motivates or drives their development. Obviously, this has some influence on what AGI systems were built and what AGI systems we're going to get. So Weaver, who we have on this panel, had an amazing PhD thesis titled Open-Ended Intelligence, where he fleshed out an alternate way of thinking about intelligence. Kabir has done a PhD thesis, which is in some ways a sequel to Weaver's. It's somewhat following on those concepts and then fleshing them out in different directions, looking at synthetic intelligence in different aspects and as related to open-endedness. And Gabe has a neuroscience background and has thought a lot about open-ended intelligence from different aspects in terms of the human brain and the different states of consciousness it can get into, including non-ordinary states of consciousness, and then how non-ordinary states of consciousness might even be emulated in decentralized digital or quantum computing systems and so forth. So whereas the last panel we were getting very nitty-gritty into engineering and mathematical architecture of AGI software programs, which is what I spend a lot of time on also. Now we're going to open things up, broaden things a bit, and ask sort of, what the hell is this intelligence that we're talking about, that computers, humans, and global brains and so forth may have? So I want to first go around and give each panelist a chance to talk for, let's say, 5 or 7 minutes or something, just about what is intelligence fundamentally in your view, or at least what's an interesting, stimulating, and relevant way to conceptualize and think about intelligence. We can start with you, Weaver, perhaps.
Okay, hello everybody. I think this conversation with David Hanson was really very fascinating, inspiring introduction to the idea or the concept of open-ended intelligence. Maybe as a opening say or statement, I would omit for a moment this A of the AGI and remain with the general intelligence. What is it? What is general intelligence? And I find it quite interesting to ask these questions at 3 distinct levels. One of them having to do with understanding human intelligence, and this is like whatever that we do in making tools, from simple arrows and stones to Go playing software or sophisticated robots, etc. Understanding all the different aspects of human intelligence. So this is the first level, which is more common in understanding of in working towards AGI. And then there is this interesting, in my eye, more interesting question is understanding intelligence beyond the human condition. It goes and opens up this, it opens up the question about what is intelligence to all life as we know it, or as we can imagine it. And there is another question, another level of asking this question, which I would like to introduce here, is to understand intelligence beyond image. Coming to say that, however we would like to consider this question, we always have a certain set of assumptions of a certain set of images, building upon our own experiences, our life experiences as individuals and also as a species, about what intelligence is and what intelligence might be. And understanding intelligence beyond image means something very special, because we have to release our own assumptions of what is it in order to create, perhaps we can call it a space for something else, for an otherness, or maybe create a disturbance that will always perturb us from our more pragmatic endeavors towards something which is other, which is still unknown. So I think that understanding intelligence beyond image also encompasses in the purest way this spirit of exploration into the unknown. And I believe that first and foremost it is, as it was mentioned already in this conference a couple of times by different speakers, that it is first and foremost a philosophical project before it is an engineering project. Not that I wouldn't like to see some engineering achievements, but me being an engineer by education, I believe that the philosophical understanding is a very, very, very good guide to how engineering is to be done, with enough thinking, with enough long-term thinking. And as a philosophical project, understanding intelligence in the sense that I try to expose here, it presents a very special problem that was also mentioned just a few minutes ago by David. It's to do with the fact that we, as humans, as living organisms, are very much biased towards existence, and particularly our own existence. And this is like a kind of a contour or a boundary to everything which we can think about, everything that almost everything that we can imagine. So the philosophical problem of understanding intelligence beyond image is a kind of going against our own bias towards existence, our own instinct of devising all those patterns that are supportive of our own existence towards other places that not necessarily are having this this property of supporting our existence as it is. So it is really a kind of a very existential, primal challenge to think about intelligence beyond our image, because it means for us to unload our image about what is intelligence. So this is one part of what I would like to say. Another part is, or another aspect which is complementary to this, is the idea of, okay, asking a question about if I have a certain idea of what is intelligence, if I have a certain understanding or an image about intelligence, I would like also to look at this image in an historical perspective, meaning to see how this image came to exist, where this idea came from, what observations, what experiences have brought me to think about intelligence in such and such way and trying to replicate it artificially in such and such manner, while I would like to know how it came about. And when I'm trying to think about this, of course, one way to approach it is to observe the evolution of life. Of course, this is the most prominent example, and everything about our intelligence makes sense only in the light of this evolutionary process, and it is partly biological, but not only. It's already have invaded, let's say, other dimensions of our minds, which are not only biological anymore. And in this sense, the question of open-endedness is replacing what does it mean to be intelligence with another question, which is what does it mean to become intelligent? And these are completely different questions, yes. So as maybe as a starter, I have a lot of what to say about it, but as a starter, I'm very glad that you mentioned this idea about altered states of consciousness, and maybe later I will also reflect on this.
Well, thanks, Weaver. Yeah, that's a excellent overview of some of the threads coming together in the concept of open-ended intelligence. Kabir, perhaps you can give your view next.
Yes. So I think I will kind of start from where we were. Well, he didn't really finish, but sort of what he introduced. So thinking of this, I mean, one thing that I see somehow from the discussions today and generally in the conference, it seems to me that there is a certain disconnection between, let's say, today's panels or today and the kind of implementational approaches which guide the engineering, I don't know, project of AGI. So we are talking about dreaming and going beyond ourselves, or let's say intelligence is something that goes beyond our image, or something that, let's say, find patterns which we cannot understand. But then when we look at engineering, we sort of seem to converge, or except Weinbaum probably, to a certain kind of optimization techniques to achieve certain goals, whether they are sort of many goals, many possible goals, or one goal. I don't see the sort of the conceptual difference. So the way I would think, if we think of intelligence of something that is not constrained by our image of intelligence, or by what we think is intelligent. Let's say what David Hanson said. What these octopus, what is intelligent of octopus and what they dream about. So then intelligence is, so building can, I mean, if I could sort of in a single like sentence describe what I would think, what AGI engine has to do, it has to be able to transcend itself, meaning to become more intelligent than it was without guidance from sort of higher intelligences, because otherwise we sort of constrain the intelligence to certain limit. So what we do now, we constrain our engines to our own intelligences, just by giving them certain goals which we define ourselves. So yeah, I would say that the let's say proposal for a guiding principle that I propose to myself probably too is to think of what kind of conceptual architecture and also computational architecture we can build in order for this intelligent, whether it's artificial or not, to be able to, transcend itself in terms of, or become more intelligent, no matter how much intelligent it is. And this is the only way to the general intelligence, because I don't see the other way of how general intelligence can be grown or built, starting with the constraints. So yeah, and then the interesting question that I'm trying to ask and trying to answer is, how actually do we do that computationally? Let's say the main sort of way of thinking, at least now for me, is that it has something to do with inherent uncertainty and sort of drive to solve uncertainty. So something that Dr. Hansen said, to have a love for beautiful patterns which are yet unknown, to sort of understand them. And that sort of to go to the limit of uncertainty and try to make sense of it. And when the sense is made of it, then to go to next limit, or let's say further, and to try solve it again. And this is a kind of, at least I consider it as a main human value, which I would sort of suggest to somehow implement in the AGIs or AI engines. So for me, so in terms of I mentioned how to do it, the way I'm thinking of it is that it has to do with this word collective intelligence. Basically, interaction between different minds and different perspectives and different opinions, and enriching intelligences by interacting. So just let's say kind of as an introduction.
Thanks a lot, Weaver. I think that's adding a few more threads to the network there. So Gabe, now your background is a little bit different. You're coming at this from a different angle. So yeah, how do you view intelligence? In the broadest sense, both human intelligence and potential AGI intelligence.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, it's interesting with the broad scope of AGI, to think about where to start. I would say my disposition is as a neuroscientist, a cognitive neuroscientist, and also as a body-mind cultivator, you could say. I've definitely taken a fascination with not only understanding consciousness or mind, let's say, in a laboratory, but also at some point I grew a little bit impatient with the pace of that, and I thought, well, there's a lot of other ways of knowing too. So let me complement that with introspection and body, mind, spirit cultivation and practice, and see what comes up for me and compare it to what I see in the literature. So that's led to kind of a two-pronged approach, I would say, for me. One of them is, and in terms of AGI and AI in general and intelligence more broadly, one is, what would it feel like to look at X, whether it's building AGI, whether it's inferring the state of mind or the proto-prehension of other aspects of consciousness that we see in nature, in our 3D reality, what would it feel like to look at X through a non-anthropomorphic lens? So how would another being perceive X or Y or Z if it wasn't a human? And on the other hand, I'm also constantly looking at the body as a sort of platform for launching into thinking about intelligence more broadly. So just thinking about the latter for a moment, it would seem at first that, you know, when we talk about the horizons of AGI, that the human intelligence may be a limitation. But I would counter that just with one point, that is that the way we're thinking about AI is kind of based upon our image of ourselves and what we think intelligence may or may not be. And I would contend that we're using quite a narrow subset of intelligence. Of, you know, if you look at Gardner's multiple theories of intelligence, we're sort of kind of looking at the logical, mathematical type for the most part, and using that to simulate other types of behavior. And for me, a lot of what we think about AI in terms of the horizons of it is based on unearthing human intelligence more broadly. And I would say that what we consider human is not only the ordinary human day-to-day existence, meaning the presumptions you wake up with in the morning, that, okay, I'm in my body, I need to be caffeinated now, I need to eat. So you're already thinking about very basic things. But when you start to cultivate consciousness and go in towards the center of your neural axis, there you approach a kind of geodesic of information density that gives you a different sense of time and space. And there's a lot of different techniques to this beyond just what is popular right now, make mindfulness and whatnot. And I think that if we want an AI that can be a steward of not only our ordinary or basic human needs, but also our deeper potentials, we need to unearth those things and use them to inspire the construction of AI and intelligence. And this isn't only for the preservation of humans, because that's just a minor fraction of, you know, the goal of all of cosmic evolution, but also having a coherent system in which multiple types of agents can thrive, I think is useful. So early on in our evolution, you know, we're making tools and we're accomplishing goals through this sort of prehension from our hand, from when we became quadrupedal to bipedal. And that gradually became symbolic prehension and pointing and whatnot. And then we could start to have some more symbolic types of thinking. And what I would argue is that we slowly constructed mind of sorts that we would project cognitively in the environment through the tools we would make. So we would outsource our cognition in the form of an artifact, and those artifacts would then pile up as we built more and more complex civilization, up until the point that we're starting to reach now in this wave of technological evolution on Earth, is developing AI, which will eventually become its own autonomous system that can self-reproduce itself. So what we're kind of engaged in is a sort of post-biological reproduction at a cognitive level. But we're projecting based upon our own image, based upon what we project as, you know, agents, our interest, which is seeing others in front of us and inferring their goals and whatnot. So we're constantly projecting outward based on this very limited notion. But if we realize that our sense of selfhood and our bodily self-awareness is basically there because our body is the physical nexus for a multisensory stream of information. All the five senses, all the senses inside the body, our vestibular perception, and so on and so forth, they're all arriving here. So it would make sense for mind to hoard most of its computational processing and resources at the spatial location of the body. But kind of what in the previous talk is, once you start dreaming, there's, in a sense, what's happening is your brain is kind of decoupling the priors of your bodily awareness. So you're kind of like severing that weight of, okay, everything that we cognize has to be through the body or through some imagination that then channeled into the body. more than daydreaming. So then what happens is that you cut off these actuators, the sensory motor system, and then your brain can sort of start to hallucinate. Now, imagine if that just kept going. So originally, I would say in and wisdom traditions and humanity, there has been a lot of permission for bottom-up static emergence rather than top-down control. So we would have shamanistic dances and ecstatic, surges of energy. And in a sense, in those moments, there's not the perception of a goal, but there's just the perception of beingness and of kind of an electrical noetic sensibility surging through the system. Now, over the course of history, somebody said, well, look at that position. And then they carved it out in a stone and it became a yoga posture. And, little by little, we're here today and we have, okay, tree pose, this pose and whatnot, when those were probably just frames in a larger film of ecstatic awareness and energy that was surging through someone. In my own reflections, I would have probably heterodoxical ideas of what intelligence is compared to science, most scientists, but here we are talking about giving acid to robots. Why not? So I would say that the noesis and the intelligence essence of consciousness, it as a complex organization. So when I look at a tree or I look at other things around me, even just, imagining the electrical currents in the air as rain clouds are forming, wind starts blowing, you can almost smell the rain and the ozone. To me, all that is somehow intelligent organization. And in and of itself, I feel like there's a self-reflexive awareness, a proto-prehension in all the aggregates of the pieces that form that system, that may be aware of themselves, but not of the whole. Just like we are aware of our own goals, but may not be aware of the goal of government or a nation state, in full transparency. So there's different levels of nesting in a complex system. And each one is intelligent in unto themselves. They are actuating their goals according to their abilities. If you're a plant, it's very limited. If you're an atom, it's even more limited. But I would argue for a sort of Whiteheadian proto-pan-experientialism, where everything has that basic mind self-reflexive awareness. Now, can we infer what that's like? That's quite challenging, but asking yourself the question, what would it feel like to look through the eyes of X, Y, or Z? That starts to pry open kind of the priors, so to speak, and the mind, and to use a Bayesian kind of typology here, very crudely. But if you start doing mind-body practices, I think there's a lot more that comes up. One that's one of my favorites is called Mahamudra, and it's used in Tibetan Buddhism and other traditions. It's basically deeper and deeper and deeper into the interdependent aggregate nature of reality. So you go deeper and deeper and deeper and perceive your own body, how you're not the first, 70 years ago or a moment ago, but not just intellectually, like, oh, I can now state that on a book in a sentence, but can I actually feel that in my own being? Can I feel almost the frames from moment to moment to moment that make up my life, and notice how selfhood and cognition is this theatrical show of basically temporal consistency of representing the self over and over and over. And the frame rate is so high that the self seems constant. Now, you and I have talked about, Ben, and about mind plexes quite a bit. And this is a kind of a fun thing to riff on, in which you could define it better as you originally. Basically, it's like two adjacent hierarchical levels of theaters of consciousness that are simultaneously active. So it's more than just an individual in a society, but it's kind of in which, they're functioning differently and they're not necessarily aware of each other in the full totality of their theaters of consciousness. But where, let's say, I'm a theater of consciousness and I'm connected to a mindplex of a bunch of different agents, artificial and human, and that collective, that global brain is also an active aware theater of consciousness as much as I'm aware, and we're both co-aware, and we can communicate together. So what I would argue is, since we're talking in the context of a singularity and developing AGI and everything that entails and implicates, is that if you're a human being in your limited intelligence, you want to discover more of the depth of your consciousness in your body, using your body as a platform, but also untether from your body to enough of a degree where you're not super surprised when you start uploading your mind onto the cloud, or you start merging or fusing your mind.
David Hanson will handle it just fine, right? So,
right. And so, you don't want to have a freak out. So I think if you can start to not just intellectually say, well, I'm sure that my speaker over here or my computer mouse has some kind of experience, and then just write it off, rather really start to go into yourself, and first starting with your body, your organs, your cells, aggregates there, then start fusing that with nature and imagining as if nature more broadly was vis-a-vis with the individual agent is a mindplex, a naturally occurring mindplex. We're an agent with goals. Human agents are agents with their own specific goals, but we're not completely aware of the goals of the larger, let's say Gaia or the nation state in which we are, the community, the laws. We're not fully aware of all that. Yeah. You're plugged in. So I think starting to practice that awareness and linking the two to become more aware of those, what will start to happen with enough practice is that you'll feel that your body is almost like holographically representative of the elements that make up all of reality. That's what we call psychical awareness, but or psychical ability. But really, it's just kind of a natural thing that emerges as you start to become aware and become sensible to the forces of nature within. So I'll pause there because I'm sure we'll have.
Yeah. So I wanna give you guys a more difficult challenge, which is to give a concise answer to something. So I want to ask a simple little question and see what each of you can say in maybe 2 minutes or less, and then we'll go to questions from the audience, which there's a number of. So what I want to ask now is what primary lessons do you think you're thinking about intelligence has for those of us who are working on engineering and designing, AGI systems, like narrowly construed as the software programs we're building, like an OpenCog or NARS or a deep neural net system? What's the message for AGI system designers and engineers coming out of your broader thinking on intelligence in 2 minutes or less? So Weaver, you can go first.
Okay, 2 minutes. 2 minutes to go. So I want to choose to answer it in a bit more, both pragmatic and metaphorical sense. Is that we need to focus more on dreaming architectures rather than cognitive architectures. And the reason is that cognitive architecture is a method of sense making. It already projects a certain meta pattern on our sense making processes, or the interactions between an agent, an intelligent agent, and its environment, how these boundaries between the intelligent agents and the environment are being formed, or how do they emerge. So we impose by devising a cognitive architecture, as general as it might be, it's imposing already a certain methodical constraints of how this very subtle interaction is taking place. And when I'm talking about the dreaming architecture, it has a certain idea behind it. Is that it is something that I was reading about in just lately from a book from the 70s by James Hillman. and he said that most of the people believe that first we have a certain cognitive capabilities, and when we expand our cognitive capability, we find the space for imagination, while he's claiming something completely different. He said that first comes imagination, and then from the imagination, a certain cognitive capability, certain cognitive capabilities emerge to allow us the interaction with the environment to create the proper boundaries. Some of them are already hardwired by biology, but not all of them. And from there came this idea of what would it be to think about a dreaming architecture that is able to produce or to create out of itself different cognitive architectures. And by that, we will be able to create something really general in the terms of intelligence, because it will not have to be in our image anymore. It can be anything. It can be, I remember this, how octopuses are experiencing reality. And I would like to go one step ahead of this, because I think that the most important thing, the most fascinating thing is not how octopuses are experiencing, but whether what is the difference between our mode of experience and the mode of experience of an octopus. Now take this and expand it all over.
Would you mind upload into an octopus, Weaver?
Not, I would be game about it. Yes, it would be. I'm sure it would be terrifying at the beginning, but maybe it would be fun as well. Yeah. So,
All right.
So that would be. This is in 2 minutes. This would be my
dreaming architecture. No, that's very cool, and that reminds me of my own attempts in the domain of algorithmic chemistry, which is something I'd like to get going in OpenCog 2.0, where you have little codelets acting on other codelets, producing new codelets. You have a sort of soup of intertransforming algorithms, and you could build something like that on top of an OpenCog and SingularityNET infrastructure, and it's something we're not putting that much resources into right now because we're focusing on more practical task achieving software. But I agree that really ties in with David Hansen's final remarks.
Yes, and there is something more. There is something more I can add later if we have the time about how this is connected to this psychedelic altered states of consciousness. There is a certain idea, a certain lesson I believe that can be taken from there in order when we start to think about dreaming architectures.
It's about fundamental creativity, right? And if you look at what our Philip K. Dick robot Deepfake is doing, or GPT-3 or Google Deep Dream, these are just permuting at a shallow level the patterns that were fed into them. And what we're talking about here is a much more fundamental and unpredictable form of creativity, which is a missing ingredient, I agree, both in deep neural nets and in current cognitive architectures, yet not beyond the potentials of what we can see doing with software that we have now, but it's something the community isn't focusing much on now. But yeah, Kabir, what are your 2 minutes of wisdom for the AGI engineer and designer world?
So the way I think of, I think it's more important. Well, let's say if we can call it wisdom, it's that I look at intelligence as a process of becoming intelligent. So let's say I'm imagining that the intelligent machine basically has to be able to become intelligent by itself. So in this sense, for me, intelligence is the process of becoming intelligent. And well, we sort of have this understanding what a human intelligence. So therefore, we sort of try to mimic them, the human intelligence or whatever skills which we consider intelligent in humans. But I think it's quite clear that we are hitting the limit of this kind of thinking when we try to think about AGIs, ACIs, and however more intelligent than humans. Not only kind of operational intelligence, like this sort of narrow, in my view, in terms of this narrow definition of intelligence as efficiency in achieving goals, but rather growing beyond what we understand now. So if I would sort of try to, well, let's maybe say propose or suggest how to go about it in terms of software architecture or building engineering, whether it's software or robots. That sort of implies that we have to build systems which would do something that we didn't predict, kind of surprise ourselves, us engineers, and kind of get the life of their own. And sort of talking in the words that were mentioned a few times, that one of the activities that we are doing, or the field is doing, is playing. This is my words of David Hanson, that's a play. So I would say that it's not that the engineers have to, only that engineers will play with architectures, but those architectures or AIs that we are building have to be able to play themselves.
Thanks. Yeah, that's yeah. Again, we're being very Hansonic here. David should be proud. And Gabe, you have some couple minutes of inspiration or guidance for AGI developers based on the broader concept of mind that you introduced in your prior remarks.
Sure. Yeah. To cover a lot of the more non-ordinary stuff, you're encouraged, I think we're all encouraged as humans building AI together in AGI to practice, because this will help us to build the Rosetta Stone, so to speak, between, the depths of creativity and the horizon of AI that we're aiming for. In humans, you have, the unconscious, you have the global workspace, and then you have the metacognition. At the very least, that's what's recognized neuroscientifically. There's probably many type consciousness, but since we're talking about these kinds of non-ordinary types, but metacognition and coding metacognition to me is an interesting area. Basically, can you cognizing, and can you sort of model what you're modeling, and can you do that in a relatively less supervised way? So that's an area that I think is interesting, and making the unconscious conscious, because that's one of the effects of mind-body practice and meditation specifically, is that you start to have more access to pre-motor planning and things like that. You can detect will and intention a little bit earlier. So that's been found empirically. So if you can make the unconscious more conscious somehow and explore what global availability means in AI terms, including more in that, that's also an interesting challenge, I think. In general, questioning while at the same time including the notion of goals in AI is intelligence, is complex goals and a complex environment. That's kind of basic, and that's certainly true, and that's enough of a challenge. But introducing novelty and creativity there, and inferring the goals of the environment so that you're all accordingly. Because what kind of an AI or an AGI is going to be one that paper clips the whole universe? It's obviously one that's not very meta aware of the environment around it, and was obviously too unintelligent enough to kind of realize what it was doing. So Can we prevent those kinds of things from more AI safety perspective? And there's a lot of work being done on this, but really looking at it from developing the intelligence of inferring the goals of the environment, inferring the goals of other agents, global braining your way towards understanding the superordinate system in which you are, and then modeling that appropriately. Still pretty abstract, but I think, you know, those are big challenges.
Yeah, so thanks a lot. So going to questions from the audience now, and it's all right if no one has a great answer to this one, but someone is mentioning recent work in computational creativity, AI generating algorithms and open-endedness stuff being done by Jeff Clune, who comes from the evolutionary computing world, Ken Stanley, and so forth. So I don't know if this is a body of literature you guys are aware of, but if you have any comments on recent work in computational creativity specifically, that might be interesting.
Yes, I'm aware at least to part of this work about replacing goal-oriented strategies of going over search spaces with some methods of novelty search. Definitely, it's a step, but again, it's for me at this point, it's too close to this engineering level, while I think certain fundamental understandings are missing from how is it that things become intelligent. And even Gabriel just mentioned something that triggered me a little bit, is just making the unconscious more conscious. It's already something that sounds so very much sensical, taking into account the human condition. But in terms of general intelligence, I'm not sure about it. Maybe there is a certain play that always needs to be played for intelligence to remain both efficacious and also creative, that there is always a certain play between dreaming and cognizing, between the known and the unknown, between the conscious and the unconscious. And this is something very important. I don't know exactly how to translate it. As of now, I don't know how to translate it into certain engineering prospects. But intuitively,
you mean it can be that formalizing and compacting things in the way that's needed to fit them into the conscious focus can screw up some aspects of these things and make them different than what they were otherwise. And
I am sure that consciousness is pretty much epitomizing a certain way of seeing the world, of making sense of the world, of making sense, not making sense of the world, but making sense of both the object and the subject of certain experience. But I don't think that the consciousness, as we know it, is a very good guide. And in this sense, I would like to say a word about altered states of consciousness, what is called altered states of consciousness, which are put in contrast to everyday consciousness. I think that what is important, what is significant in altered states of consciousness is the way that they are emerging. They are emerging while certain chemical agents intervene in our central nervous system, not at the systemic level that we see ourselves, but at much lower level. And therefore, they create certain emergences that are completely unpredictable and completely non-linear. And this kind of difference, where the intervention here, it's in our biological system, it's a chemical intervention, where the intervention, or let's say the intervention in the hardware is happening, and where the sense making is taking place, are at a completely different scales of the system operation. And I think this is interesting. How to translate it into engineering precepts, I wouldn't venture into speculating about it right now, but I think this is very, very interesting. It's that, and this is what is happening. This is what is happening where somebody is experiencing altered states of consciousness, is because the sense making and the intervention, or the process that is happening at the same moment, and the sense making are happening at the different scales, and there is a tension between these scales, and there needs to be a new individuation of your experience. What you have to make sense all new, because you don't have this let's say historical baggage to guide you into it. It allows you to make sense anew. Anew, I mean, in a novel manner, it is not anymore guided by linear everyday consciousness. And this is something that I would use as a metaphor or analogy into how to think about architectures.
Yeah, it feels like, in terms of lessons for architectures, a very key higher level theme is that, you know, there needs to be much more focus on emergent dynamics rather than on engineering the specifics of what the mind is going to do. So whether you're engineering the goal function or engineering the cognitive architecture, the line of thinking that all of you guys on this panel are leaning toward is more, we need to be creating a sort of primordial mind soup or something out of which structures and dynamics of intelligence will emerge. And then part of the beauty of the unconscious is that it is this primordial mind soup out of which things can emerge and crystallize. Yeah. And when you feed the unconscious into consciousness, meaning deliberative, reflective consciousness, you're getting some crystallization and crispness, and you're able to build kinds of structures you couldn't build in the unconscious. On the other hand, you're also losing some of the emergent generativity that you have there in the unconscious as a mode of organization. I don't know, what do you think, Gabe, about that way of formulating things?
That's another word. It gives you the opportunity to re-establish or reform the boundaries between you and the universe. This is, I think, this is a core issue in general intelligence, is how the boundaries are.
Well, just like goals, the boundaries co-evolve with the rest of the system, right? Yeah. Gabe, before we wrap up this panel, do you have any final comments on this sort of unconscious conscious dynamic?
Yeah, I think it's certainly true that you're not going to want to make all the unconscious stuff go into consciousness, because to a certain degree, all that stuff, all the unconscious stuff is being modeled by the levels of consciousness above it. So, and it's there for a reason. So you can devote more attention to other things. But at the same time, I think, you know, in certain modules, perhaps of an AGI system, having access to that emergent soup and understanding that it's going to allow you to maybe build kind of like a more abstract fractal version of that lower. So the superordinate levels could learn that this is actually emerging and creating and divide and create its own rules to a certain degree. It could create itself, jumping the gun there a little bit, but, you know, we could potentially go in that direction where the superordinate levels could observe the subordinate levels and create their own hierarchical architectures above it. So there is quite a wellspring of inspiration there that could be drawn if it's engineered to do so.
Well, thanks a lot, Gabe. So, I mean, we could go on a very long time with this stuff, but I think we now need to move on to the next keynote speaker. So yeah, thanks Weaver, Kabir, and Gabe for contributing all your creative dreaming and cognizing here. And I look forward to continuing the open-ended explorations with all of you.